my name is Associate Professor David Suggett, and I lead the Future Reefs programme from University of Technology, Sydney. And originally I was an oceanographer by trade, and I'm a marine biologist and born-again coral scientist. My current research is on an organism called Symbiodinium. It's the algal symbiont of corals. It's probably one of the most important constituents of a coral to be able to thrive, survive, but also it determines how resilient it is to stresses and climate change. You might also know Symbiodinium as coral symbionts or zooxanthellae. There's lots of common names that individuals and people use to describe what are small, single-celled, brown microalgae. They're tiny, typically about the size of 10 microns, invisible to the naked eye, but corals absolutely pack themselves full of these symbionts. So corals pack themselves full of these symbionts because it's what gives them their energy. So the symbionts, they're photosynthetic just like any other algae. They take energy from the sun and they convert it into oxygen and they convert it into sugars. Now all of those sugars then are passed across to the coral host. So the coral host is quite cheeky. By pulling all of these symbionts into its tissues, it gets free energy, free sugars. It's a bit of a cheap fix in terms of living its daily life under the sun. It's one of the really key reasons that I started looking at Symbiodinium and symbiont biology is it's inherently connected, if not the main driver, of mass bleaching, mass coral bleaching. And in the last 2 to 3 years, we've witnessed some of the worst catastrophic ecological events of coral reefs on record. I was unfortunate enough, if you like, to be in the Seychelles when that happened, and I witnessed firsthand swimming over reefs I've seen grow and develop over the last 10 to 15 years collapse within 2 to 3 days. And what drives that is the corals go ghostly white. And what is happening is that the symbionts are becoming increasingly toxic to the hosts, and the corals want to expel these symbionts. Now what drives that is excess temperatures typically, but other stresses can do it. If there's not enough light, if there's too much acidity, all of them lead to the same outcome. Ultimately it's this toxicity of the cells to the coral. So the obvious thing is get rid of your toxins. So under extreme temperatures, it drives the metabolism of the algae really quickly. And all of the energy in the algae has got nowhere to go but drive lots and lots of free radical production. So temperature in particular is a really big problem. And all of this happens within the space of a couple of days, shunts all of these free radicals into the host, and the host has to get rid of the algae. Now this is really bad news. Now in the short term, losing these toxic algae is really good. But in the long term, the coral is gradually like a ticking clock of a loss of energy. If you imagine your batteries have suddenly gone dead, you've got a limited time frame then to reboot. So corals are really racing against time then for water temperatures to return to normal when they can reacquire their symbionts. Now this is a real challenge for corals because this is where it gets tricky. Reacquiring their symbionts typically depends on what's left in nature. And there's some really cool studies now that are showing that during a heat stress event, some corals may expel their really toxic algae, but they may be able to acquire some really tolerant algae. Now that's why we're so interested in Symbiodinium, is starting to understand what makes certain species of symbionts particularly heat tolerant. Those are the algae that are really going to ensure that we have coral reefs into the future if we do nothing about our carbon emissions. So although all corals associate with these symbionts, we now know through sophisticated molecular techniques that these symbionts are comprised of thousands of species. So this has unlocked a huge question for us. We've built up a very large collection of these different species in culture. And over the past 5 to 10 years, we've gradually used different types of technique to ask, how do these species operate differently and provide different benefits to different corals? So for example, we've used really advanced biooptical tools to learn that some symbionts are much better at dealing with light energy, and especially under heat stress, than others. And this is now telling us how certain symbionts are most heat sensitive or tolerant. We're now using really cool chemical analysis, and we're starting to understand that these symbionts also kick out not just toxic gases, but also lots and lots of different volatiles, some of which have really important benefits for the atmosphere. So increasingly we're building up this really complex mosaic that under different scenarios, different symbionts provide all sorts of benefits. The obvious question is why are we doing this? Well, we're now at the stage where we really want to boost the ability of coral larvae to grow and survive on the reef and replenish coral reefs. And a really important part of the life cycle of corals is when the eggs and sperm fertilize to produce the larvae, they have to reacquire their symbionts. They have to repartner. And it's a game of chance. They've got a limited window as larvae to survive before they can reacquire the symbionts and start photosynthesizing, basically restocking themselves with new batteries. So what we're doing here is, through our knowledge of which symbionts give the best benefits, is we're starting to inoculate the larvae with these different species. And the goal is to see, will that give our larvae a much greater chance of survival, and can we replenish stocks and abundances of corals quickly? So using all of this knowledge, we're now trying to apply this knowledge to the Great Barrier Reef. Now, the Great Barrier Reef has lost a huge proportion of its corals over the past 2-3 years. So using our knowledge of symbiont biology and how it can potentially fast-track coral recovery and survival, primarily we're using this on the Great Barrier Reef because it's on our doorstep, of course, and it's been massively impacted. However, this technology can be scaled globally ultimately. There's no reason why we can't apply these same ideas and tools and technologies. There's a small caveat to this, is that when you go to other regions of the world, there are different species of symbiont. So actually we need to start understanding the biology of symbionts in other regions. And actually, do they have different species but ultimately offer the same functional benefits? One of the most amazing things I've encountered as a scientist has been the unknown and finding symbionts and corals in the most unexpected of places. And that for me is exciting because in this day and age, actual exploration is not really a key component of our work. That's actually fast changing for me. About 2 years ago, we visited New Caledonia, and it was on a hunch that corals were surviving in some real extremes. A pH as low as 7.2, temperatures as high as 33 degrees, and 0 oxygen. These are mangrove lagoons. And we went to this system, and lo and behold, we found multiple species, as many as 40 species, and many of the same species that we're seeing catastrophically bleach on the Great Barrier Reef. So it's starting to tell us that corals are extremely resilient. Now, a really important part of this finding is when we probed the corals, they had acquired some novel symbionts. So there's some really, really special symbionts out there that we're only just discovering. We still don't understand their biology. So we've been looking at Symbiodinium for 50 years, I say we as a community, and unbelievably, we're still making these incredible discoveries. We just need to be brave enough to look in new places. You know, a very cool thing that many people won't know about these symbionts is that we discovered 2 years ago they can calcify. Now, the way they can do this is they can calcify outside of the coral by, they start to exchange resources with bacteria. And when conditions get really tough, they form this amazing calcium carbonate shell and they hide inside of it. And we think it's actually to protect themselves on the reef. So when the going gets tough, they build these little houses, they hide inside. We didn't know this until 2 years ago. So one of the coolest things about Symbiodinium we have to remember is it's been around for hundreds of millions of years. So it's had an opportunity to evolve and survive through countless environmental shifts. And actually, the more we really dig deeply into its biology and ecology, we are finding it in the most unexpected of places, and we're finding that it has evolved as a species to tolerate some extremes. Another really cool story is that about 3 or 4 years ago, in the Persian Arabian Gulf, which is the world's hottest sea, can get up to over 40 degrees, is again, it's just evolved into this super symbiont that can tolerate extreme temperatures. So again, we just need to get out there and keep looking at where this organism is and what it's doing. What do I love about being a scientist? Well, every day is different. You know, there's never a dull moment in the office. In fact, I normally have a list of 5 things I want to do when I turn up to the office in the morning, and I've already torn it up by about 8 o'clock. So for me, it's the day-to-day unexpected findings that occur. I can walk in the lab and it's different. But of course, the really special part is getting out of the office and being in the field. We have a lot of opportunity to just get out there and discover. I mean, the way we talk about Symbiodinium is it really is the ecosystem architect. Without Symbiodinium, corals can't grow, they can't calcify. So if we didn't have Symbiodinium, we wouldn't have reefs. They really are that important. And trying to understand their biology is probably the most important part of coral reef science in some respects. Of course, I'm going to say that. Because really trying to work out whether we'll have reefs into the future could ultimately depend on whether we can find the right symbiont for reefs to survive.